Coming up on Global Business, the U.S. House of Representatives has passed a bill to lift the government's $31.4 trillion debt ceiling. We'll bring you the latest and take a closer look at the aftermath. China's Ministry of Commerce says knowledge-intensive services have been a key driver of trade so far this year. On International Children's Day today, we'll look into China's children's consumption market, the new demands and patterns. Hello and welcome to this edition of Global Business on CGTN. I'm Guan Xing in Beijing. We begin our show from the United States. The U.S. House of Representatives has passed a bill to lift the government's $31.4 trillion debt ceiling. It's a major step to avoid a destabilizing default early next week. The bill for the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023 now has to the Senate before the signing by President Joe Biden. For the latest on the U.S. debt ceiling issue, we're joined by our correspondent John Terrett in New York with more details. Hi there, John. After large vote in favor in the House, what is the next step in the U.S. debt ceiling issue?
Well, you're absolutely right. We did get it through late last night in Washington, D.C. 314 votes in favor, 117 against, overwhelmingly passed in the House of Representatives, and that despite weeks of bitter argument over what's in this bill and rancor as well. So now, as you rightly say, it moves on to the House, but I'm afraid you should probably expect more drama. The Senate, it moves on to the Senate, and the Senate is quite capable of the same level of drama as the House of Representatives. We've already heard from senators in Utah and in Vermont very angry about what's in this bill and apparently prepared to delay its passage. Now, Chuck Schumer is the leading senator in the state of New York. He's also the head Democrat in the Senate, and he's promised to get this done for his president, Joe Biden. And he's also promised to try and do it swiftly. Now, the Senate is a debating chamber. It's supposed to take its time, okay? But they can move swiftly if they want to, and Chuck Schumer is saying he will try to do that. However, there are serious reports out there now of progressives on the left in the Senate and ultra-right-wingers on the right, Republicans, conservatives, determined to delay passage of this and potentially even add amendments to it. Now, if they do that, it will have to go back to the House for another vote. So you can see the issue that we're facing at the moment. All the time, the clock is ticking down to that much more serious deadline of June the 5th, which is Monday. And an example for you, last Thursday, Bloomberg is reporting that the Treasury here had $38 billion in its coffers, down from $200 billion earlier in the month of May. So you can see how close they are to running out of money now. And that's why it is serious and why it's all eyes on the Senate.
Well, John, how have the markets and the dollar been impacted by the ongoing U.S. debt ceiling issue or the possibility of more drama, as you mentioned?
Well, the way I explain this is that the stock market, I think, and I'm there every day, as you know, for CGTN, the stocks have been pretty sanguine about it, to be perfectly honest with you. And I think that's because they think they know how this movie ends. You know, the princess gets her handsome prince at the end, everybody kisses and makes up, and they go away again. And that's because that's what happened in 2011 and in 2013. The stocks have been much more concerned about the Federal Reserve and interest rates. They'll have to decide again on the 13th and 14th of June. They were much more excited about Nvidia and the microchip situation, particularly at the NASDAQ in the last couple of days. And they will be excited tomorrow to see what happens about the jobs report for the month of May. And I'll be with you on the program tomorrow to talk you through that. Also, there's another inflation report coming up just before the Federal Reserve meets on the 13th and 14th of June. So that's where Wall Street is at. Bonds have been a bit more edgy. You ask about the dollar, well, it traditionally rises by about 2% when they sign these deals, so we'll see what happens there. There's a conflict between policy, which is raising interest rates, and growth. You want to raise interest rates to hobble inflation, but you don't want to hobble growth too much. And for all of those reasons, right now the Dow futures are down about 100 points, and that's because they're not quite sure what exactly is going to happen over the next couple of days in the Senate. It is possible we'll have a resolution today, but most commentators think this is going to drag into the weekend.
Well, thank you very much for all that information. There is John Terrett live for us in New York. Well, the U.S. debt ceiling is causing concerns among policymakers and economists, both in Washington and financial capitals across the globe. But how significant is this matter and what implications could it have? Take a look.
The U.S. debt ceiling is a legal limit set by Congress on the amount of money the country's government can borrow to finance its operations and meet its financial obligations. This includes paying for essential programs like Social Security, defense, and healthcare. So why does the debt ceiling matter? Because it acts as a check on the government's borrowing authority. When the debt approaches or reaches the limit set by Congress, the Treasury Department can no longer issue new debt to cover the budget deficit. It essentially puts a cap on the national debt. But what happens if the debt ceiling is breached? That's where things get tricky. If the debt ceiling isn't raised or suspended, the U.S. could face serious consequences, including defaulting on its financial obligations. This could harm the nation's creditworthiness, increase borrowing costs, and negatively impact financial markets. To avoid such a scenario, Congress needs to take action. In the past, lawmakers have raised the debt ceiling through bipartisan agreements, allowing the government to continue borrowing and meeting its financial obligations. However, these negotiations can be contentious and may lead to political battles or even government shutdowns.
And now for more insights on the U.S. debt ceiling issue, let's bring in Le Xia, Asia Chief Economist at BBVA and Academic Committee member of the IFF. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Xia. So the debt ceiling debate has impacted the confidence of foreign creditors in U.S. Treasury securities and the dollar. Can U.S. leaders be trusted to address debt reductions in a timely manner and act more responsibly going forward?
Yes, thank you for inviting me. I think the situation is that this happened many times. As we know that since they have this debt ceiling cap, they have been revised this one more than 100 times. But this time is especially worrying because now it's almost last minute and they reached this kind of the deal. We're still not sure, of course. Then if these things will continue, I think in the long run, people will worry about the safety of their investment in U.S. Treasury bonds and in U.S. dollar. Whether they can effectively reduce this debt level, I'm afraid not, because we know that now they set this debt ceiling as absolute value. But with economic growth, we are going to see this debt level will become bigger and bigger. So I think they have to revise this one again, maybe in a couple of years.
So though a default may have been prevented this time, credit ratings agencies have issued warnings over potential consequences of debt ceiling deadlock. Will fiscal uncertainties continue to exert downward pressure on U.S. sovereign ratings? And what implications could this have for U.S. borrowing costs and the dollar?
Yeah, this time we are glad to see that they are very likely to solve this problem. But it is true that this rating agency don't feel comfortable with the actions by the government, by this Congress. I don't think they are going to downgrade U.S. this time, but in the long run, as I said, maybe there's a risk that this treasury bond of the United States is no longer the safe asset in the world. If that's going to happen, I'm afraid that will have very negative impact on the global financial market. The problem is all these financial markets globally, they are quite dependent on this U.S. Treasury bond as their anchor. So if this U.S. Treasury bond is to be downgraded, then the market will become confused. They don't know what the new anchor is. And the portfolio manager, they have to dump part of their treasury bonds of the United States. That will cause a lot of trouble in the global financial market.
Indeed. And what is the impact of America's political and economic system on global investors and trade partners after experiencing policy dysfunction during the debt ceiling dispute?
I think as foreign investors, they will think about diversification. Okay, so now it seems that this U.S. Treasury bond is no longer the safe asset. So they will try to find alternatives, maybe they will find other government bonds, the government bonds issued by European government, the government bond issued by Chinese government, by Japan government. They will find alternatives. At the same time, I think that maybe they will rethink how they are going to manage their wealth, how they are going to manage their foreign reserve. So now we know that I think the majority of international foreign reserve are invested in US dollar, and most of them are held by these treasury bonds of the United States. In future, I think they will find alternative investment to store their reserves.
Well, from China's perspective, what sort of hedging strategies should be considered for the future?
I think from China perspective, definitely now some people talk about China can push forward this globalization or internationalization of this currency. I think that's a very good hedge against this situation. We also think about whether we should keep that much foreign reserve denominated in this US dollar. I think in future, as I said, they can diversify to other assets. Maybe they can diversify the global reserves to this European countries' bond, to Japan bond. I think these are effective ways to hedge against this one. Also, in future, we can think about how to use this new technology or new arrangement to diversify. For example, China can sign these swap lines, bilateral swap lines, with more central banks to diversify the risk of too concentrated on this US treasury bond. At the same time, maybe China can consider push forward their CBDC, the central bank digital currency, to diversify their risk of this one. Yeah.
And then China should explore all those options. Thank you so much for your insights. That was Lesha Asia, Chief Economist at the BBVA and Academic Committee member of the IFF for us. The U.S. commercial real estate market is facing a potential crisis. Prices fell in the first quarter of 2023 for the first time in more than a decade. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a significant impact on the sector, with remote working embraced by many companies. It could also have a costly spillover effect on the banking industry, responsible for trillions of dollars of loans. Benji Heyer explains.
The 9 to 5, the commute, the office. Is it all a thing of the past? More people are returning to the workplace, but coronavirus has changed the game, and the economic effect of the pandemic is sending commercial real estate prices down by almost 1%.
There's a lot of headwinds right now facing commercial real estate. So first and foremost, you have elevated interest rates. The Fed basically hiked rates from 0 to 5% in a very short period of time. Those elevated interest rates put downward pressure on commercial real estate prices. I think on top of that, we've got some of these longer term, I'll call them structural changes right now, particularly around working from home. So you've got more and more folks who are spending time at home, and as a result, they're not spending as much time in the office and in the associated sort of spending environments, all of which tend to be really prime locations for commercial real estate.
And analysts suggest those longer-term trends are likely to persist for the next decade.
It's going to take some time to figure out where people exactly are going to be spending most of their time. And it would not be surprising to me if you had properties that were based in city centers close down over time, and eventually things would be built more in the suburbs and exurbs.
Bad news for the banks. That's because they account for nearly 2/3 of the $3.6 trillion in outstanding commercial real estate loans. Smaller institutions are left particularly exposed at a time when several have already collapsed under the strain of interest rates. Further rate rises to counter inflation could make it even harder to retain deposits and would push up the cost of loan repayments.
So property owners are looking elsewhere for a solution. With more students than space at some colleges, their answer could lie here.
universities are expressing an interest in leasing office spaces, since they want to bring back to the class the students, and with providing an office space like a space that is very close to what it is like in the office space with high ceilings, this can bring like more students back to the class.
Yet, as office blocks across the country remain empty, construction of commercial space is still on the rise. The hope that the sector can build back from the brink. Benji Haya, CGTN, Washington, D.C.
Turning to some of the world news headlines we're tracking at this hour. Average house prices in Britain experienced a significant decline of 3.4% in May, following a 2.7% annual fall in April, marking the sharpest drop since 2009. Meanwhile, in the Eurozone, there was a continuous slump in demand for manufactured goods, which led to a deepening of the downturn in manufacturing activity. The final Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index for the region fell to 44.8 in May, marking the 11th consecutive month where the figure was below the 50 mark that separates growth from contraction. However, Australian business investment experienced a surge in the first quarter of this year, with a rise to $24.5 billion, a 7-year high, propelled by increased spending in mining, manufacturing, and transport. And now we're heading for a short break, still to come on the program. On International Children's Day today, we'll look into China's children's consumption market, the new demands and patterns.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
China's Ministry of Commerce says knowledge-intensive services have been a key driver of trade so far this year. Officials made comments at a news conference in the Chinese capital of Beijing on Thursday when they released data for the first 4 months of the year. Yang Chenxi was there.
In the first 4 months of 2023, China's services trade continued to grow. Imports and exports volume stood at over 2 trillion yuan, or over $290 billion, a year-on-year increase of more than 50%. The highlight, the knowledge-intensive services trade, with its volume up by over 13% year-on-year. It constituted more than 43% of all traded services from January to April.
The second highlight is that travel services have clearly recovered, with imports and exports reaching around 444 billion yuan from January to April, a year-on-year increase of around 63%.
The spokesperson said the export of insurance services and the import of personal entertainment services were among those with the fastest growth from January to April. Yang Chengxi, CGTN, Beijing.
It has been 3 years since the overall plan for the construction of the Hainan Free Trade Port was released. Ling Wo takes a closer look at the progress made so far and the efforts to launch independent customs operations in 2025.
On May 28th, the Hong Kong registered oil tanker Lian Shanhu, owned by the Hainan COSCO Shipping Company, arrived at Yangpu Port from Brisbane, Australia. It is the second COSCO vessel to take advantage of the Hainan Free Trade Port zero tariff policy.
It saved us 60 million yuan. We went through the formalities at Yangpu Port. It took about 1 week from customs declaration to the completion of all the formalities.
Nearly 40 international ships have registered at Yangpu Port to date. The port is linked to 43 domestic and foreign trade routes, connecting ASEAN member states, the South Pacific, Indian Ocean regions, and West Africa. Imports and exports amounted to over 34 billion yuan in 2020, nearly doubling to 95 billion yuan last year. Trade in services reached more than 2.4 billion yuan in 2020 and 8.9 billion yuan in 2022, a threefold increase 3 years. The actual utilization of foreign investment over the past 3 years grew 8 times, and offshore trade 10 times.
What we have been doing is to create a clear, transparent, and predictable policy environment for the export-oriented economies in the Fortune Global 500 and China's Fortune 500.
Hainan is scheduled to introduce island-wide independent customs operations by the end of 2025. This year marks a crucial milestone in reaching that goal. Yangpu has already carried out tests in areas of policy implementation, facility operation, public service platforms, and management.
After the independent customs operation, we will adopt an import and export management system featuring free flow through the first line and efficient control at the second line. We, together with customs and maritime departments, will join efforts to streamline the clearance procedures and try to reduce the pressures on enterprises.
Lin Wo, Sansha Satellite TV in Hainan for CGTN.
A private survey has revealed that China's manufacturing activity rebounded in May, exceeding the 50 threshold that signals expansion after contracting in April. The Taixing Purchasing Managers Index rose to 50.9 thanks to improved demand and production. The positive developments suggest that the country's economy is on the path to recovery from the impact of the previous month's dip. And next, let's take a look at what else is happening in China. Trading in China's futures market surged in May, with increased demand seen for popular commodities such as steel, rebar, soda ash, and soybean meal. In Shanghai, Waigaoqiao Shipyard has started preparatory work for the launch of China's first large homegrown cruise ship, the Adora Magic City, with the flooding of the dry dock. China has achieved a milestone with the number of parcel deliveries reaching the 50 billion mark 27 days ahead of the same period a year ago. As we celebrate International Children's Day today, the Chinese children's consumption market is heating up, driven by new consumption demands and patterns. According to data released by China's Children's Industry Center in 2022, children's consumption accounts for 30% to 50% of the total expenditures in 80% of Chinese families, with annual expenses per family ranging from 17,000 to 26,000 yuan, resulting in an annual consumption market worth 3.9 trillion to 5.9 trillion yuan. Educational toys and outdoor children's products are popular among young parents. According to JD.com, Scientech toy sales have surged 172% in the first 2 weeks leading up to Children's Day. Many modern parents have a special tradition of taking their children out for a memorable meal on the June the 1st holiday. And now, with plenty of options besides fast food restaurants, finding something delicious and kid-friendly has never been easier. And Indri has more on expanding choices for families.
For many kids, Children's Day means no school, a day out to enjoy the sun, and a later bedtime. But for parents, it can be tough as children can be picky eaters, making dining out a chore. Keeping that in mind, many businesses like this pizza restaurant in downtown Shanghai now offer a special menu of food and beverage items for their younger customers. And of course, the children's menu is not just available on Children's Day, ensuring the restaurant is always an attractive choice for families.
We're getting a lot of parent-child customers now, around 30% of our total. To meet the demand, we now update the children's menu once a quarter. Before, we just made the change every half year.
Swedish retail giants IKEA gets plenty of parent-child customers, and not all of them come for the furniture, saying it's the kid-friendly food at the company's restaurant that appeals to them.
It's easy for me to make an order as there's a kids menu. I bring my daughter here every week.
We come once a month. Many other restaurants, they don't have many kid-friendly foods.
As children can be fussy eaters, the company also updates its kids menu more frequently, and that results in more sales.
Chinese parents, they not only want their kids have healthy meals, but also hope the food can have variety. Besides using high-quality ingredients, we need to make the dining items in appropriate portions for children. To appeal more to children, we now offer pasta in the shape of elk. These have all helped to boost sales of our kids' meals this year.
And to make it all more attractive to families, the company is now holding more parent-child events. And of course, there are the toys. Always the toys along with the meals. 殷俊一 ICS for CGTN Shanghai.
Before we go, we show you a story of an owner of a 9-year-old coffee brand in Beijing. It shows how individual business owners navigate market upheavals and competition to succeed. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.
谁学拉花啊？谁学拉花，我免费教啊！报名浇花不是拉花，您来学个拉花呗，创业致富。
画圆，好，压低。 山不转水转。我负责我们品牌的这个自媒体嘛，我觉得现在一个新的时代的这个创业者可能需要一个对外的窗口。哎，好 ，espresso。以前我们要去通过广告、通过新闻、通过投广告，现在如果你把自媒体做好了之后，其实已经节省大量的这个营销费用。我觉得这个疫情呢属于一个黑天鹅事件，它属于突发性事件。其实这反而考验了一些企业的一些应变能力。胡同拉花队其实是一个咖啡机的广告，需要一个小片段，那我们就稍微的拿手机录了一下，编辑完之后就发朋友圈和发小红书了。但是呢，当时的很松弛，我拿手机拍的时候就很调侃的，就是哟，这像是好，对，铁扇公主的芭蕉扇啊，可以啊，就让看的人。 就没有防备的就看进去了，然后完播率就很好，然后呢突然就爆了，然后有几十万的阅读量啊这样的，我们也没有想到啊，你这些危机会激发你的一些潜能。说实话，自媒体就是因为这个疫情，就强迫的我不能动这个实体店的事儿了，门店没有了嘛，那我们在社群里面其实是可以跟客人交流的，就是我们线下没有了，但是线上的生意翻了1倍。咖啡店老板的一天，我们在疫情的时候差不多开了三里屯、春秀路、大悦城、门头沟、青岛、亮马桥。 天津7个，大家看到的课程呢，实际上是一个大的规律。很多的在一线城市的这种北漂啊什么的，想回老家了，回老家他做点什么呢？我觉得不一定说开咖啡店，但是在我们这里他获得一些做实体的一些思路，啊，我觉得我们都说要振兴实体经济啊，其实是这个实体的这个对经济的拉动性，实际上是最。 怎么说？就是经济最前沿的，就是他开店，他得雇人，就得找装修师傅，他就要交租金、交房租。我觉得其实2、3线城市的房租并没有那么贵，像有的城市，你可以看到成都啊、重庆的这些咖啡馆很兴旺，就是年轻人很容易的实现自己的理想，就实现自己开店的想法啊，就是感觉可能整个城市都在开快闪咖啡店一样。我觉得咖啡馆是一个城市文化的载体。 我们这些人的存在呢，希望就是这个城市呢多元化一点。咱们这些胡同生活氛围、市井气很重要。然后你要告诉我们的这个街道政府，我们可以把这个小店开好，负责人开好，它是美的，它是可以跟邻居之间一起做非常好的生活氛围的。之前我在这行业的时候，正常的时候，我觉得所有人都要干这个，就是你懂和不懂，只要你有钱都可以干这个。我觉得有点劣币驱逐良币的意思，啊。 但是现在经过这个大浪淘沙之后，疫情能扛过去了，就证明就是你是 OK 的。我觉得你是在这个行业里面是具备一定的生存能力的。我觉得未来的实体是自带流量的品牌，是可以跟商场进行议价的。以前是不会的，以前轮不着你的。好了，我觉得我是对这个未来是看好的。这是一个机会，对。